Hi everyone and welcome to another video from Korean Studio. My name is Kim Gi-hwan. Now in today's video, we're not going to be teaching you any specific Korean grammar or Korean vocabulary, but we're going to be talking about the topic of grammar. And we're going to focus more specifically on learning what grammar knowledge is, why we learn grammar, and also how we can learn about grammar. Okay, so let's talk about what grammar knowledge is. Now, in 2012, I did my MA in Applied Linguistics, which I finished in 2015. And during my studies, I came across a very interesting concept of defining what grammar knowledge is. And these are implicit grammar knowledge and explicit grammar knowledge. And implicit grammar knowledge is basically grammar knowledge that all native speakers have. So whether your first language is English, Korean, or French, Italian, Chinese, Japanese, or any other language, you have what's called an implicit grammar knowledge. And implicit grammar knowledge is the most perfect form of grammar knowledge because if you think about how any native speaker uses their first language, it's perfect. They don't make any mistakes, or well, they might do occasionally, but they tend to just use the grammar knowledge to form the most perfect sentences without any hesitation. There is no thought process that goes into forming sentences, and they're able to just use it, form the most perfect grammatically structured sentences, and use it in the most appropriate situations. So implicit grammar knowledge is the most perfect form of grammar knowledge. However, one thing you find with implicit grammar knowledge is that you are rarely able to verbalize what you know. So if you speak to any Americans or British people about English grammar, they find it very difficult to explain about grammar rules of their own language. And this is the same with any Korean person. If you were to walk up to a Korean person and you asked about the differences between topic marking particles and subject marking particles, they'll just sort of give you a very blank look and just go, I know how to use it, but I just cannot describe it. And that's what implicit grammar knowledge is. On the other hand, the other form of grammar knowledge is explicit grammar knowledge. And this is the grammar knowledge that most language learners have. And this grammar knowledge is formed through explicit grammar teaching, where as a language learner, you go into a classroom and you have a teacher in front of you, and then the teacher explains the grammar rule and shows you how that grammar structure is used in certain contexts, provides you with example sentences, and then you do lots of exercises to sort of use that grammar structure to sort of develop your understanding further of the structure and how that grammar is used. And that's what explicit grammar knowledge is. Now, the problem with explicit grammar knowledge is that it's not the most perfect form of grammar knowledge, because if you think about most language learners, when they try to use that grammar structure, particularly when they're speaking, it takes them a lot of time to think about what they know and try to formulate sentences, and this leads to reduction in fluency. It's that sort of and then speaking, and then pausing and speaking, because it requires a lot more processing time to use explicit grammar knowledge. Now, ultimately, then, what we're trying to do when we're learning grammar is we want to first develop explicit grammar knowledge through explicit grammar teaching, whether it be learning from a teacher in a classroom, learning from a book, or maybe you're watching YouTube videos. But we have that explicit teaching of what grammar rule is, and then we develop that explicit grammar knowledge. But then somehow, once you have formed that explicit grammar knowledge, we want to continue to do things and then get to a stage where it becomes an implicit grammar knowledge, almost a native-like grammar knowledge, so that you are able to use that grammar knowledge without too much processing time, so that you become more fluent in using that language. So the big question is, how do we go from explicit grammar knowledge to implicit grammar knowledge? Now, the first stage in this process is that initial explicit grammar teaching and learning what that grammar rule is. And then it requires a lot of different activities, various different things that you can do to strengthen that knowledge and then for it to become an implicit grammar knowledge. And that requires, first of all, a lot of input. So whether it be reading or listening, whether it be reading a book, whether it be listening to songs, whether it be watching Korean dramas, and really seeing how, language is used in specific contexts. And when you see language used in context, not only does it teach you how that language is used appropriately in specific situations, but it really helps for you to retain what you have just read or what you have just heard in dramas or books. So input is absolutely crucial in strengthening your grammatical knowledge. And as well as grammatical knowledge, it's also going to help you with vocabulary, and with listening input, it's also going to help you with pronunciation. So input is an absolutely important part of developing your grammar knowledge, or moving your grammar knowledge from explicit to implicit. Now, the other important part to this process is output exercise. So that involves writing and speaking. I think writing is obviously a lot easier because you just need a pen and a paper, or maybe you could write on a computer, but it's something that you can do by yourself, whether it be writing a journal or whether it be writing stories. But if you can practice writing and trying to use what you have learned, whether it be grammar and vocabulary on a regular basis, that just helps to strengthen your understanding of the language that you're using. Speaking is obviously the other part of the output practice, but that's is the difficult part, because for most people it's hard to find someone to practice with, because I think a lot of people tend to learn Korean by themselves. But if you can find some sort of a social group where people come together to practice speaking Korean, or if you are willing to pay for a tutor and practice using Korean, that's going to be a huge help as well. But I think there has to be a balance of both input and output. And most people tend to think that output practice is more important or as important as input. But I think in terms of developing your grammar knowledge, input is far more important. So try to incorporate lots of reading of Korean, and obviously lots of people enjoy watching Korean films and Korean dramas, so keep watching them, and all that input is eventually going to really help you to strengthen the grammar that you have learned. And eventually when you do learn complex grammatical structures, it will make it a little bit more easier to learn those if you have been exposed to those structures in reading books or from Korean dramas that you enjoy watching. Okay, so I hope I haven't rambled on too much, but I really wanted to make this video because I think a lot of people who learn a language tend to focus heavily on grammar. And while that is important, and for absolute beginners, you need to learn the basics so that you can formulate basic sentences, encountering language, interacting with language through reading or listening is incredibly important. So yes, dedicate a certain amount of time trying to learn grammar, but also try to dedicate a certain amount of time, as much time, on trying to incorporate a lot of input into your language learning process, whether it be reading books or watching or dramas or listening to songs. Okay, so that's it for today. I hope this video gave you some useful knowledge and advice on how to develop your grammar knowledge. I look forward to seeing you soon again. Bye-bye.